Episode 3 Eternally Eris. Rabinos sat in the alchemy tower, as he had for the past 2 weeks, moving the stone across the training room floor. After his first casting had knocked him out cold, Rabino had feared trying again. That is, until Linrim convinced him otherwise.
"It was your first casting, boy,"
Linrim had said at dinner the next evening.
"The first casting is arguably the most dangerous casting a will mage will ever cast. Unless, of course, your third casting killed you. Then I suppose the third casting would have been the most dangerous. Anyway, what I'm getting at is you now have a feel for what it is to engage and expend the will in your well."
What good is that if every casting knocks me out?
"Oh, for the love of will magic, boy,"
Linrim set his utensils down in exasperation.
"you successfully casted one time. Do not give me any of that assuming crap. If your next dozen castings robbed you of consciousness, we would talk. I thought you wanted to be the best there ever was. Are you giving up so soon, Rabbit?"
Just like that, Linrem turned Rabino's despair into determination. After dinner that night, and every night and morning since, Rabino had gone to the training room and practiced his casting. It occurred to Rabino that he may have been manipulated by the crafty old man, but if it ended in him becoming a powerful will mage, then a little bit of manipulation was hardly the worst that could happen. Besides, Rabino could be certain that Linrim had his best interests at heart. The ancient mage hadn't given him any reason to think otherwise, and Rabino certainly couldn't provide a list of reasons why a powerful will mage would adopt a troublesome child, especially after said child tried to pick his pocket. So, instead of focusing on Linrim's possible motives, he simply focused on his casting. It didn't take long before his conversations with the stone became more of an exchange of feelings. Rabino felt it strange equating what he witnessed in his mind to emotions on a human scale, but to him it also felt strangely right, like finding an ancient tool and then marveling at the fact that it fits your hand perfectly. Thinking of it in terms of emotions, Rabino was able to streamline his casting process until he was simply exchanging the proper tone of yearning, convincing the stone to move at his will. Rabino had been spending the evening, currently, trying to repeat the casting enough times to calculate the exact cost on his will. But it was just as Linrim had told him. Every single casting exacted a different cost. Oftentimes, they were minuscule in difference, but different they were. He was toying with the idea of taking detailed notes on his castings as he repeated the endeavor. Perhaps having a larger compilation of data would give him a better idea, or perhaps give him some sort of average. Rabino truly hated the immeasurable aspect of will magic when rustling in the training room caught his attention, pulling him from his meditative state to complete alertness. Opening his eyes, Rabino scanned the room around him, looking for telltale signs of Linrim's mischief. Several times already, the spry old man had managed to sneak up on Rabino and scare the crap out of him. He would cackle madly, spout off about the need for situational awareness, then disappear into the alchemy tower once more. Rabino couldn't see his master, but that didn't mean he wasn't hiding somewhere nearby. Closing his eyes, Rabino pretended to sink back into his meditation, even careful to pace his breathing, and opened his ears, listening. It did not take long for his ploy to pay off. Within minutes, Rabino heard rustling from the other side of the training room. He quickly looked to the source of the noise, but, once more, there was nothing. Scowling, Rabino closed his eyes again and waited. And waited. "Are you even trying to cast?" Rabino opened his eyes and looked around sharply, but no one was there. "Because that is not how you do it." "Who's there?" Rabino shouted, fear spiking at the unknown voice. "Shouting is unnecessary, I assure you." It was at that moment that a small feline head entered the top of Rabino's vision, only the head was upside down. It was only when the cat had leaned forward to peer down at Rabino that he had even felt the weight on top of his head at all. With a yelp, Rabino scrambled backwards, throwing the cat unceremoniously to the training room floor in his panic, though the cat landed as gracefully as if it had never been thrown in the first place, its sheer black coat shining in the sunlight pouring in through the windows. That, the cat said, clearly annoyed, was also unnecessary. What? Rabino sputtered, wide-eyed in shock and amazement. What are you? How rude. The cat began licking its forearm and stroking its face. Rabino was so taken aback that he just sat and stared at the cat, cleaning itself for a long moment. He said slowly. I'm sorry? You should be, the cat said, raising its gaze to look at Rabino briefly. I am not a what. I am a her. Thank you very much. And she promptly went back to grooming herself. Rabino blinked and stared, slowly processing what he was witnessing. It had happened enough times now that he could be fairly certain it was indeed the cat talking, and not some sort of puppetry occurring from the shadows. However, that did nothing to make sense of the situation, seeing as it only left him with a talking cat, and she was clearly very haughty about it. The cat seemingly finished cleaning her face and sat staring at Rabino, licking her chops several times and displaying an impressive set of pearly white fangs. What is your name, boy? The cat said after a moment. Rabino opened his mouth to reply when she cut him off. Do you see what I did there? She said in a conspiratorial voice. That is a more appropriate greeting, child. Rabino blinked, feeling stricken. Rabino sputtered before starting over. I'm Rabino. 'Tis a pleasure to make your acquaintance, Rabino. The cat slid a paw forward and inclined her head in what Rabino expected was a mimicry of a bow. I am Eris, the eternal cat. Rabino frowned. The eternal cat? Yes, came the only response. What makes a cat eternal? Rabino puzzled.
I do.
Rabino started and scrambled again, this time looking to the stairs, where Linrem stood with his hands on his hips, looking right at the eternal cat like she had wronged him dearly.
Eris, Linrem said curtly, with all due respect, where in the hell have you been?
I suppose it is good to see you too, Lin, Eris said, raising her snout and looking down at him. Not that it's any of your business, but I'll have you know I was taking a lovely nap.
For 28 years?
Honestly, Eris looked over at Rabino. Can't a girl curl up for a couple decades without being harassed about it?
I thought you likely curled up somewhere under the tower and died.
Oh, come now, Lin. Eris cocked her head to the side. It was you who graced me with eternal life. You should have known I wouldn't perish so easily.
How in the hell does one sleep for damn near 30 years anyways?
The sunshine from the parlor window was irresistibly delectable. Besides, she straightened up, sitting on her haunches once more. Being eternal can be so exhausting.
All you ever did was mope around and harass me,
Linrem shot back, glaring.
What's so exhausting about that, And I searched the parlor on several occasions, Eris. I do not believe that is where you have been hiding for all these years.
Oh? Eris lay on her side and stretched her paws out before her. Did you look on top of the bookshelves? Linrem stared at the cat for a long moment. His face contorted between indignation and irritation.
Damn!
Eris cooed. That's what I thought. Linram huffed.
Those shelves are 10 feet tall, Eris.
Clearly not a problem for the eternal cat, Eris returned, now sitting up and regarding Linram with a cool stare. And surely it's no obstacle for the mighty Linram. How hard did you even look, anyways?
Sure you weren't watching me from up there?
Linram crossed his arms.
Now that I think about it, there was a strangest sensation in the parlor.
Oh, that. Eris seemed to grin, as much as a cat could. Maybe I was watching, but if it was merely due to the ruckus you were making.
A ruckus I was making?
Linram's face grew angry and his arms dropped to his side, fists and balls.
Searching for you!
There was a small pop, and suddenly the eternal cat was gone, vanished in the blink of an eye. Rabineau frowned, looking around. Surely the cat couldn't have gone far. Now, Lin, Eris cooed softly. Is that any way to greet an old friend? Rabineau snapped his focus to Linram and saw that Eris was now perched on the old man's right shoulder, rubbing her forehead against him affectionately. Linram's frown deepened, but Rabineau could see the tension relaxing from his body. With a sigh, he reached up and scratched the cat behind the ear.
Why must you be such a pain in my ass?
I don't think you quite understand how a relationship with a cat works, Eris replied. I do whatever I please, and you feed me and give me scritches.
Oh, is that right?
Linram chuckled. Yes, Eris replied sternly. Cross me, and I'll cut you. At that, she preferred a paw and extended all 5 wickedly sharp claws, wiggling them before Linram's face. Must I remind you the heat of my retribution?
Not necessary, Eris.
The old mage reached up quickly and swooped the cat into his arms, cradling her like a babe and tenderly stroking her chin and belly. I know where all the good spots are. Devious human, Eris said, closing her eyes in ecstasy. How dare you? Oh, yes. Now that is the spot. Eris began purring loudly, eyes shut and body completely lax in Linram's arms. The old mage scratched the cat as she turned her head delicately so he could get behind one ear and then the other. Rabineau watched the exchange with bewilderment, his jaw slightly ajar, eyebrows scrunched together. Master? Rabineau asked, breaking the silence after a long moment. Linram looked up at the same time. Eris cracked open a single eye, both of them regarding him, his master with curiosity, the eternal cat with bemusement. What, Rabineau stopped, remembering what the cat had said. Who is that? And what exactly is an eternal cat? Seemingly pleased that Rabineau had not misspoken in her regards, Eris closed her eye once more as Linram answered.
Yes, he began slowly. I suppose I hadn't mentioned Eris to you at all. This here is my dear old cat Eris.
I'm not old, Eris said sharply from his arms without opening her eyes. You're old. Linram continued without missing a beat.
I grew lonely around, 160 years ago, and found this little girl on my way back from town one day. She was chasing a squirrel through the trees, and when the squirrel jumped a gap that Eris here couldn't quite clear, I almost had him too, the eternal cat said bitterly, extending her claws as if in memory of the chase. Didn't stop her from trying, though, Linram cackled. She came plummeting through the canopy to land square on my lap.
Planned it that way, Eris muttered softly.
I took her home, and she became my beloved pet. It wasn't until,
Linram paused in his scratching to stroke at his beard and thought. Eris immediately reached out with both paws, grabbed Linram's arm, and directed his hand back to her belly.
Nearly 50 years later that I noticed she was still spry and crafty as ever. I suppose it was around that time that I noticed she began talking. That was an irritating development. Eris dug her claws into his arm. Pardon, my dear. I meant an interesting development.
Linram chuckled and smiled down at the cat. So, wait, Rabineau began. You didn't intend to make her eternal?
Boy, Linram shot back, do you really think that if I knowingly had the power to imbue eternal life, I would start with a cat?
What's wrong with cats? Eris had opened her eyes and was staring daggers at the wizard while she flexed her paws menacingly.
Oh, nothing at all, my dear, nothing at all.
Linram began stroking her chin, and the cat's eyes drooped shut once more. As soon as Eris was no longer looking, Linram shot Rabineau a meaningful look before rolling his eyes.
Moral of the story: don't keep pets around your workshop unless you want a self-torture device of incredible quality.
So, what? Rabineau frowned. Eris is indestructible?
Eternal, not immortal.
Both Eris and Linram answered in unison. Linram frowned down at the cat, but she said nothing more, so he continued.
Eris can still die, but she will never die from natural causes. See?
Rabineau said, still confused. No.
If a boulder fell on her, it would crush her and she would die.
Linram delved into depth.
But year by year, she remains untouched by time. I could eviscerate her, and that would surely end her life. Believe me, I've considered it.
He paused and regarded the cat.
However, given that nothing takes her life from her, her life will never end.
But how do you know that?
For starters, cats really never live past a couple decades,
the old man said.
And this little she-devil is quickly approaching her second century. In addition, once I noticed the changes she was exhibiting, I took a closer look. The exposure to wheel magic has altered her cellular structure and accelerated the rejuvenation process. Unlike most living things, and indeed, even unlike her earlier self, as our cellular structure repairs itself over the course of our lifetimes, it breaks down, makes mistakes. This, essentially, is aging. Once the machinery makes too many mistakes, that's lights out. Eris, on the other hand, has had her cells supercharged. They no longer make mistakes, ever. She also heals at an astonishingly accelerated rate.
That's incredible, Rabineau said with his jaw slightly ajar. And you have no idea how you did it?
Not a clue!
Linram laughed bitterly.
For now, only Eris here remains untouched by the ravages of time.
You've weathered the storm quite well yourself, old man, Eris said without opening her eyes. It's what? Nearly 500 years you've been living now?
Give or take a decade, the old man brushed it off. You stop counting after a while.
Rabineau snorted and choked on his own spit, coughing and spluttering for several long moments before he was finally able to find his breath once more. He looked up at his master. 500 years? Linram shrugged.
Will magic may have that effect on you, boy.
But you just said you have no idea how you made Eris eternal.
I don't,
he replied honestly. Then how in the hell are you 500 years old?
Nearly.
What?
Nearly.
Linram looked at Rabineau and raised an eyebrow.
Nearly 500 years old.
Rabineau took a deep breath to calm himself. Fine, he said between clenched teeth. Nearly 500 years old. How in the hell are you nearly 500 years old?
No idea.
Linram smiled at Rabineau with a sparkle of glee in his eye.
Welcome to the world of will magic, boy.
Do all will mages live so long? Rabineau found himself fascinated.
Oh, hells no,
Linram said with a chuckle.
The vast majority don't even make it into their 40s, let alone upwards of centuries. It takes a truly gifted will mage to survive for that long.
Another thought occurred to Rabineau. Master, he began, are there others like you, gifted mages that have survived for centuries? All the mirth disappeared from Linram's face like a fire doused with water.
Yes, there are.
Are they powerful? I think, Eris cracked an eye open to survey Rabineau, that if they have survived that long, they are forces to be reckoned with.
She's right,
Linrim said grimly.
only a handful of mages have made it long enough to become incredibly powerful. And of those, there is only one that I fear may grow stronger than even myself.
Eredin. Eris snarled, her hackles raising. Linrim nodded.
Eredin.
Rabineau frowned. I feel like I've heard that name before.
You probably have,
Linrim continued.
He fancies himself Emperor Eredin now. He has ravaged the lands north of Galita and consolidated them all under his banner.
Rabineau felt his blood run cold. Does he intend to invade? Linrim sighed.
As long as I breathe, he will not dare to come my way, so Galita is safe for now.
How can you be so certain, Master? Silence answered his question. Linrim's eyes had gone unfocused, staring into space. Lin, Eris said softly, pawing the man's beard affectionately. You can tell him. Linrim shook his head as if the spell had been broken, and he regarded the cat with a smile.
Right you are, Eris. Right you are.
He looked back at Rabineau.
I can speak with such certainty,
He began slowly.
because Eredin was my first apprentice. The only other apprentice I have taken on beside yourself.
Rabineau stared at his master in shock, jaw slightly ajar. He tried to say something, but there were no words that came to mind. Linrim nodded sadly.
He was the reason I took no one else under my wing for 300 years. Took no one until you, Rabbit.
What happened? Rabineau blurted out. Linrim smiled sadly.
Let us just say,
He began.
that we parted ways.
Parted ways? Rabineau asked. Kind of seems like there's more to it than that, Master. Are you daft, boy? Eris asked.
Eris!
Linrim protested. Not this time, Lin, Eris said, straightening up as much as she could in Linrim's arms and regarding Rabineau. If you haven't picked up on it, the story is not a nice one. Your master is still distraught over the ordeal. If Lin wished to tell you the story, he would have. Now leave it at that. Rabineau was so taken aback by the near hostility coming from the cat that all he could do was nod mutely. Good boy. Eris curled back up and grabbed at Linrim's hands to get more belly rubs.
Eris is right on this one, Rabbit.
Linrim said quietly.
One day I shall tell you of what happened all those years ago. But for now,
He looked up at Rabineau.
I will say that if you are ever so unfortunate as to cross paths with Eredin, with or without my presence, be prepared to fight or flee for your life. He does not take kindly to other will mages.
Is that why he's conquered the north?
No,
Linrim replied.
he conquered the north to make himself stronger. Strong enough to eliminate me, I imagine, was the goal. Who knows?
The old man looked very sad.
It has been so long since we matched wills. He may already be stronger than me.
Why would he treat you as such a threat? Linrim looked straight into Rabineau's eyes, peered into his soul. The fire Rabineau saw inside him was humbling.
Because he wants to conquer everything, Rabbit. And I will die before I let him exert his will over the world.